Thank you for being here. I know it's always very difficult to leave your comforts at home to come and visit a museum that's about baseball. First of all, let me explain how I'm going to proceed with my presentation. This wall right here is early Brownsville, beginning with early 1900. In the very first professional baseball team that came to Brownsville in 1910. This wall, this panel here represents 1938, the second time that professional baseball came to Brownsville. That back wall represents 1949 to 1952, the third time that professional baseball came to Brownsville. The wall that you have over here on the side represents the 1953 Charros. This wall here is I call my heroes, and I'll explain why later. This is the pattern that I'm going to follow. One important thing is that who am I to speak about baseball? What qualifies me to speak about baseball? Well, let me just tell you a little bit about myself and my background. My father began playing baseball here in Brownsville in the 1920s. But because of an injury, he found a place in the dugout as a manager, a coach, a secretary, a promoter, up to the 1950s. So my house was never absent of baseball stories. I heard about El Sain Cantu, Saino Rocha, La Burra Contreras, who's sitting right here to my left, and Las Burritas, who was his brothers. The big burra was his father, and then there was three burritas, and he was one of them. Ray, thank you for being here. That's another one. But my house was never absent of baseball stories. I heard them all as a little kid from my dad. The stories about Adolfo Arguijo, one of the most famous pitchers we had here in the valley, and of course Leonajo from Mission. And there's a third one by the name of Lupe Rodriguez from Harlingen that played in the Cincinnati system in the 1920s. So I heard all those stories. And the other part is that I was very fortunate that in the 1950s, I was a bad boy. And there's a photograph on the other side of this panel of me as a bad boy. And it takes a skill to be a bad boy. You just don't sit there and pretend that you're watching the game. You have to do something. I had my brother Ruben by my side in the first game, giving me instructions on how to be a bad boy. And I learned very soon that it was a task. It wasn't easy. But it was an experience that I'll never forget. So when I'm talking to you today, I'm talking to you through the eyes of a bad boy. I'm talking to you from a little kid that heard the stories of the old days. And I'm also talking to you about the research that I've done in the last 10 years. But most of the research is about Brownsville. And Brownsville teams, Brownsville ball players. I'd rather be at a Little League baseball game, a good Little League baseball game, or high school or college baseball game, than in a major league park. That's me. I was just last week watching West Brownsville. It was North Brownsville Little League, and they had two fantastic pitchers for Brownsville. It was a heck of a game. I'd rather be there. My claim to fame, ladies and gentlemen, is that I played 6 years of Little League baseball. And I had two roles. Back then, there was no coach pitch, there was no T-ball. I was the first one in Brownsville as a Little Leaguer to serve as a bat boy and as a player. I started as a 6-year-old and was there for 6 years in the Little League. I only played in my earlier years when the bases were loaded. Guess why? Any idea?
Too short.
I was too small that they couldn't find the strike zone. So they put me in there and I walked 9 out of 10 times. I remember standing in a batter's box, closing my eyes, and listening to the ball whistling by me. Thank God I never got hit. In 6 years. That's my claim to fame. Let me just go now into this wall that I have here. But before I begin with the 1910 Brownies, we have to go earlier than that. How did baseball, where did it begin, and how did it get to Brownsville? And how did it spread from Brownsville throughout the valley? We have to look at 1839. And in 1839, according to historians, Abner Doubleday was the inventor of baseball. Some historians will say that he had nothing to do with baseball, with the invention of baseball. He died a war hero. But as far as we're concerned here in Brownsville, he invented baseball. Where was he in 1839? He was at Cooperstown playing in a cow pasture a ball game. And he was a cadet at West Point. Why is that important to us here in Brownsville? Because in 1846, we had the beginning of the war with Mexico. Palo Alto and Resaca de las Palmas. So when we speak about baseball, we speak about war as well, as I move along here. In 1846, Abner Doubleday was with Zachary Taylor and was stationed at Port Isabel. Now there's a guy at Port Isabel by the name of Manuel Hinojosa that says that they played the first baseball game in 1846 in Port Isabel. That's not right. He's speculating. There's no mention that there was a baseball game played in Port Isabel anywhere. He was there in May of 1846. Now I have in front of me, thanks to the National Park Service, a roster of all the troops that were stationed in August in Matamoros. And Abner Doubleday's name is here. He was in Matamoros in August of 1846. After the war ended, Doubleday, of course, as Zachary Taylor moves into the interior of Mexico, and the war ended in 1847. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, and Doubleday comes back to Fort Brown. He's stationed at Fort Brown for 3 months. Did he play a baseball game? Did he organize a baseball game there? We don't know that. A friend of mine who is a former professor from Pan Am in Edinburgh, I talked to him several weeks ago, and I said, Dr. Chance, you wrote a book about Abner Doubleday and his experiences in the war. I said, yes. And you wrote also about Doubleday being at Fort Brown in 1848. He says, yes. Did you find anything that he organized a baseball game while at Fort Brown? He said, no. There's a newspaper that came out of Fort Brown, the American Flag. The American Flag started in 1846 up until 1848-49. And I asked Dr. Chance, have you looked through those newspapers to see if you would find something that Doubleday organized a baseball game? He says, Rene, I've looked through all the newspapers. Thanks a lot. It'll save me years of research because I was going to do the same thing. So there was no ball game organized by Doubleday. Moving up to 1865, and 1865 is important. 1861, the beginning of the Civil War. Why is that important to baseball and to Brownsville? Because out of the Civil War period, all of you have heard that baseball is America's pastime, right? Where did that come from? Well, it came out of the Civil War period. Because the troops played against each other. Union and Confederate troops played against each other. During the quiet days of the war, a ball was seen crossing enemy lines. The biggest ball game being played during the Christmas event in South Carolina. There were 40,000 troops watching a ball game, celebrating Christmas. Unbelievable. There was a period of time where also blacks and whites could play on the same diamond, which was also another incredible thing. So out of the Civil War period, baseball became very popular. The troops made it very popular. During that period of time also in 1864, Candy Cummings, the name of Candy Cummings comes into play. Why? Because Candy Cummings invented the curveball in 1864 during the Civil War. He was walking on the beach through seashells and they were curving. He did the same thing with a baseball and started curving. It's important to Brownsville because the curveball gets to Brownsville by the turn of the century. And I want to tell you two individuals that brought it here. The curveball ended many careers, including mine. If you can't hit the curveball, you're not going to go very far. Right? Exactly. So Candy Cummings is to blame for all of that. The first one in 1864. Right after the Civil War period, which was 1865, was the last of the Civil War period. By 1869, Brownsville has and plays the very first baseball game here in the city. First recorded. It took me a lot of research and time to find that, because prior to that we had no records of when the first baseball game came to Brownsville. The team was organized in 1868. The very first ball games in Texas were in 67 and 68 in Galveston and Houston. And Doubleday was over there during that period of time during Reconstruction. It's just a coincidence that the very first ball game was played in Galveston and Houston when Doubleday was there. But here, we formed our very first team, the Rio Grande Valley Baseball Club of 1868. 1869, we played the Unión de Matamoros. We beat them 29-22. And it was stopped because of darkness. They started at 2 o'clock, and by 6 or 7 it wasn't over yet. But that was the very, very first ball game that I can prove that was played here in Brownsville. How did I find that out? Through a friend. A friend introduced me to a researcher and an author from Mexico. He found a newspaper article published in Mexico during that period of time. 2 months later, the game was played, let's say in November. December and January, it's published in Mexico City. So now I have to go back to the library and look at the Daily Ranchero from that period of time and look for the box scores. We have a video that shows the box scores and the members of those teams from 1869. Can you believe that? They're there. And we have it in a video somewhere that we can show later. But I found the box scores, the names, and the score, and the umpires, etc. Amazing. All right? 1869. Let me see. I must look at this because I don't want to forget certain things that I want to mention here. Okay. In 1873, right after that, 1873, we hear of Henry Martin Smith. Who's that? Well, Henry Martin Smith was the first major leaguer to come out of Brownsville. Okay? He was born in 1873, but in 1903, he was playing with the Brooklyn Superbus. And he has a story. Born and raised in Brownsville. 1903, opening day at Polo Grounds. It's a boy from Brownsville, Smith here, pitching against Christy Mathewson, the darling of the mound for the Giants. Capacity crowd. The boy from Brownsville takes him out and beats Christy Mathewson in 1903 at the Polo Grounds. Our first major leaguer. I thought Charlie Vaughn was the only one from Brownsville. Nah, Charlie, you were not. Don't hide. You were not the first one. It was Henry Martin Smith. Okay? And Henry Martin Smith's got a story. He went 22-13 that first year. Brilliant. Okay? Brilliant. The season ends, he goes back to California where he lived. Charles Abbott sends him a contract during the offseason, sends it back unsigned. Hey, what's going on? The guy went 22-13. He could have had a brilliant career, right? He didn't see the major leagues after that. Why? He returns it with a note. I don't like living in the East Coast. The hell with y'all. That was his story. He left a one-liner in the baseball encyclopedia. Brilliant pitcher, though. That was him, 1903. As we move